Minneapolis Riverfront Forum. Give you all a chance to settle in. My name is Cordelia Pearson. I'm Executive Director of the Minneapolis Riverfront Partnership, and we are co-hosting this evening with the Above the Falls Citizen Advisory Committee. And just to get warmed up, I want to ask a little bit about you. How many of you, just raise your hands, how many of you live in the city of Minneapolis? Wow, great turnout. How many of you live within half a mile of the Mississippi River? Wow, I'm impressed. How many of you represent, work for, own a Minneapolis business? Great. How many of you work for or belong to an environmental organization?
A what?
Environmental organization. Okay, great. How many of you have visited the Mississippi River in Minneapolis? Okay, kind of figured that would be pretty good. How many of you have not been on the river in Minneapolis? So a couple people. We'll take you out on a canoe trip, right? Okay, now here's a good one. How many of you have told someone that you are now in a national park? All right, John Anderson from the National Park Service. Okay. It's amazing how, I moved here 20 years ago, and every day I tell people I, live right next to a national park, and it's news. So we're very happy to have this great asset here. The reason I asked, though, about business and environment and where you live is that 10 years ago, when the city, the park board, and others created this vision for a revitalized riverfront in Minneapolis, they thought ahead to how they want to sustain that vision. And one of the things they decided to do was create a nonprofit organization called the Minneapolis Riverfront Partnership. And I'd like to call on our board of directors members to stand for a moment and be recognized. The Minneapolis Riverfront Partnership, Scott Vreeland is one of the founders. Diane Hofstede, I think, is around the corner. Who else do we have here? There you are, Diane, wonderful. Diane and Scott together as Park Board Commissioner and City Council members spearheaded the effort to create the Minneapolis Riverfront Partnership. We have citizen members as well, Georgiana Yantos and Mary McGuire and others. So one of the other things the Above the Falls plan said is we need a citizen advisory committee that's going to be there day in and day out representing Riverfront, representing this plan and getting the plan done. Those of you who are on the Above the Falls Citizen Advisory Committee or have served at some point on that, can you raise your hands too? So seek those people out afterwards if you have questions and ask them about that. There are openings on the Above the Falls Citizen Advisory Committee, so think about that. So if you're excited about helping shape the future for this area, please consider becoming a more active part of that. I'd like to introduce then Diane Hofstede, who will introduce the city effort of planning for the Above the Falls area.
Thank you, Cordelia, and thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm seeing some very familiar faces and also seeing some new faces. So to each and every one of you, welcome, and thank you for being engaged in this very, very important discussion. This evening we'll kick off a discussion about a zoning study that is partnering with the Minneapolis Park Board to be able to fuse the zoning changes that will be coming before the City Council early next year and the proposed recommendations and changes before the Park Board, and of course the new River First Plan, which is a Park Board initiative. Tonight we are really, I think, very lucky to have two of the top people, not only in the Park Board with Andrew Caddick, who will be giving his presentation later, but also Hyla Mays with the City of Minneapolis Planning Department. These are two individuals that have worked collaboratively not only with our partners at the city, but our partners throughout the City of Minneapolis. So we hope that you'll get engaged. If you have folks who are not here this evening, just to mention that you're welcome to send emails, call council offices, call Hyla, call Andrew, and certainly voice your opinion on this very important plan. So without any much ado, I want to thank the Above the Falls Committee for being so engaged in this process and keeping the dream alive, and to each and every one of you for your participation this evening. And I'm going to introduce Andrew Caddick with the Park Board.
Thank you, Councilman Hofstad. Before I get into the slides, I have a hand-raising exercise too, just one. How many folks here tonight were at the June 26th meeting, the first of 3 meetings about this? Great, thank you. I also want to point out that we have, on your way in, you probably saw comment cards and more up here. If you want to leave a comment with us, you can use this. You can take this home, and there's a web address for our project page where you can leave a comment online. You can also mail this back to me. You can email me, my contact information is on here. So there are plenty of ways to contact us. And on our project page, Park Board, we link to the city's project page, which has contact information for Highland and city staff. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the presentation. And since many of you were here on June 26th when I did a summary of the 2000 plan, I'm going to breeze through that. And if there are questions at the end, maybe we can return to that. So briefly, what we're going to do tonight is I'll summarize the plan background, the original Above the Falls plan, and talk about what the process has been to date. The folks from the city's health department and from the Above the Falls Citizens Advisory Committee will talk about a health impact assessment that is being done in parallel with this plan update and which is informing our work and helping us reach out to various communities to ask them about the river. That's a very helpful partnership. We're going to talk a little bit about recommendations for land use and for development in the plan area. I'll talk a little bit about parks and trails recommendations in the same area. We'll talk about implementation steps, and we'll talk more about that actually in the next meeting. And then we want to open it up to questions and answers like this, and we can use the boards that are on the side to point at some of our questions too. Okay, so a brief summary of the 2000 Above the Falls Master Plan. It was developed over a few years actually prior to 1999 when it was authored and it was adopted by the city and the Park Board in 2000. Since then, it's guided the development of the park system along the river, and it's guided the land use and the development within the plan area that you see here. So it's interesting that there are some, Councilmember Hofstad referred to River First, I think, too. Many of the principles that I'll talk about when I mention River First a little bit later in the evening are deeply embedded in the Above the Falls plan. They share a lot of principles, and I hope you'll see that as we go through. So some of the principles include extending the parks and trails along both sides of the riverfront between the Plymouth Bridge and the city limits, or the Canyon Bridge. The recommendation in the 2000 plan is for more compatible development along both sides of the river, more compatible than the heavy, dirty industry that we have today. What was envisioned was intensive residential and mixed-use neighborhoods, sometimes high-rise and very dense neighborhoods along the river. Much of this plan has been implemented, and I'll show you a map of that. And the reason we're here tonight is that it's been updated to reflect many changes since 2000 when it was adopted, including much of what's been implemented, as well as different market conditions and different policy directions from the city. And I will talk more about that. That's a brief summary of the 2000 plan. What we've been doing so far, Hyla will talk more about this, but for actually a year and a half or so, the city has been engaged in a policy review of the Above the Falls plan, asking questions about what's worked, of what's been implemented, of what hasn't been implemented, why, is there a need for change in land use policy direction. The city has done a bunch of research on updated market conditions, and updated conditions in the plan area. And this particular process that we're engaged in now has focused much, to a great extent, on reaching other communities other than the folks who maybe show up to meetings like this. We've done a lot of meetings in between these meetings to go to community centers, to cultural groups, and to inform them of our process, but also to ask them about how they might use the river. What do they see in this plan that's of value to them? What's missing? So we focused quite a bit on community outreach. And as I said, our first public forum was on June 26th. So this is a brief timeline of what I've been talking about. The Above the Falls Master Plan was updated in 2000. We're engaged in this process since 2009, as I mentioned, when the city started looking at different land use policies. 2010 and 2011, the Minneapolis Riverfront Design Competition and the Minneapolis Riverfront Design Initiative were put forward by the Park Board. They resulted in a winning competition entry called River First, and I'm just curious how many people are familiar with River First. I hope Okay, so enough about that. The river first was adopted by the Park Board of Commissioners this year, earlier. And we're in the process of developing a draft public health plan update. We anticipate that in early 2013, we'll have a completed plan that will go through a public review and comment period before it goes before our respective elected bodies, the Park Board of Commissioners and the City Councils. This is the process we've been following, as I mentioned. It summarizes what I've been talking about, but I want to point out that there's the original plan at the top. There's the policy review that the city's been engaged in for a couple of years. There's River First. There's the health impact assessment that's informing all of that. This is happening in parallel with the city and the park board working to combine these to update the plan. Okay, so actually I'm surprised, but sometimes I hear from folks that nothing ever happens with plans. We make a plan and it sits on the shelf and it's paper. I think master plans like this especially are a really great lens through which we can see opportunities. Land comes up for sale, we have to know what we want to do with that land. If there's an opportunity on both sides of the river or with infrastructure changing, we need to know what we want to do. So I'll just point out briefly some of the things that have been implemented from the 2000 plan. One is that Parkway and Parkland was extended north of Plymouth. As you see here in green, it was extended up past Broadway to where we are right now here at the Park Board headquarters and up to the Burlington Northern Rail Line. Pretty significant. Also, the Park Board relocated its headquarters here in the spirit of committing to the river. Other businesses have located their headquarters here, like Coloplast. The Grain Belt site was redeveloped. More parkland was acquired recently in the past couple of years, and the soils were cleaned up at the Sharer site. Parkland continues to be acquired along especially the northeast side between Marshall and the river. There haven't been many land acquisition opportunities yet, although the Park Board continues to pursue and seek those opportunities on the north side of the West Bank. The Lowry Bridge was reconstructed in a way that was pretty much consistent with the Above the Falls plan. And the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization located their headquarters on the river, and there are others listed there. So it's just a sampling of some of the things that have been accomplished and why a plan matters. And I'm going to turn it over, after that summary, I'm going to turn it over to Susan Bixby, I believe, from the Above the Falls Citizens Advisory Committee. And Jessica, are you going to join? And they'll summarize some of the health impact assessments for you. Kenya McKnight, are you going to join us also? Great.
Kenya McKnight and I are the co-chairs from AFPAC for the health impact assessment. Jessica works with the city, and the health department of the city is the one implementing this assessment. Health impact assessment is really a tool that can be used to evaluate the potential health effects of a proposed project or plan before it is built or implemented. So it's an analysis of how this proposed plan, for example, the Above the Falls plan, connects to the health of the community, and from there to develop recommendations to mitigate any health concerns around the plan. So in other words, how do the proposed changes that the City and Park Board are addressing now, how are they going to affect the health of the community? Many of you may have seen the surveys, and we have them in back. Community input is critical, and we do have a survey we'd like each of you to complete, and it can make a difference. For example, this is a very controversial example, but I'm going to say it anyway. I know that many of us were really not happy with the MPCA's decision to deny an environmental impact statement in the recent controversy surrounding Northern Meadow. But because of the community input from not only residents across the state, but Minneapolis, particularly those from north and northeast, legislators, City and Park Board elected officials and staff, the MPCA did decide that they're going to set up an additional air quality monitor to measure the cumulative effect of the particulate matter from this area. So my point in all this is that community input did make a difference. So what we'd like to know with this study is how you feel and what's important to you. Personally, I really like to bike and hike the trails that are up and down along the river. It's relaxing, it has health benefits, but especially for those of us who like to bike and walk, access to the river is important. The Cedar Lake Trail and the Greenway, the Minneapolis Greenway provide wonderful access to the trails that's safe. What I would like to see is, and I know it's under revision now, is the 26th Avenue Greenway be developed so that those of us in North Minneapolis have the same safe access to the river.
So the part I'll focus on a little bit is, what does the health impact look like? What could it look like? So the first part of it is the roots of the tree. The roots of the tree essentially represents how our environment and neighborhoods impact our health. Meaning, when we look at that, we have to ask ourselves, are there parks there? Is there, healthcare, education, noise and pollution, unemployment, poverty, racism, transportation? I mean, what exactly does the roots represent in our community? The second part of it would be the trunk of the tree. And all of the above, the trunk, represents how our communities can be affected, environmentally. Having safe places to walk, bike, socialize, lifestyle choices and behaviors, smoking, violence, it could be a number of things. These are just some things to think about. And the last part, although it says leaves on my paper, you don't really see leaves up there, but the words that are in the black, white outline, or in the black, represent the leaves, which are also things that, all of those things are, our environment is affected by those things. So I guess the point of that is just to think about, it's not one thing, it's not just pollution, it's not just crime, it's not just, this or that. It could be whatever that is environmentally safe and healthy for us as a community. And it's not just the parks, it's where you live right now. And how where you live is connected to the river, and what makes your neighborhood, our neighborhood, and this river safe and a healthy place to go visit. Sorry. For me personally, why I like the river, I currently live in North Minneapolis for the past 27 years, and the one thing I've noticed the most over the past year since I've been biking more is that there's very limited access to the river. I often have to go downtown Minneapolis or in Northeast just to sit by the river and actually get my feet wet or throw some rocks or something like that, which is important to me for mental health purposes. When you live in stressed environments where there's always stuff going on, it's always busy, like our city in itself, but an even more condensed area in certain parts of North Minneapolis, it becomes critically important to have outlets to relieve yourself, in a healthy and safe way. And so the river is important to me for that purpose, so I have to drive or bike downtown again or to Northeast Minneapolis, which I enjoy both sides, but I would most definitely love to be able to access the river here in my own community. So that's my part of it, and I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you very much. I'll just introduce myself. I'll be
All
quick. My name is Jessica Finlay. I am an intern with the City of Minneapolis, and I'm helping with the HIA for the last, I don't even know, about 9 months now. I'm also a master's PhD student at the University of Minnesota. My work is in health geography, which is exactly on this topic, thinking about how the built environment, how your neighborhood impacts your health. And I'm going to briefly summarize to you what we've been doing through the HIA, some of the research we've been conducting, and our engagement in the communities. Over the last, since June 2012, we have been meeting with various organizations and communities in the North and Northeast Minneapolis, as well as in the downtown and some other areas adjacent to our study. We've also conducted outreach at community events. We have had a survey we've developed that we've done both online and in person. And you saw copies of that today. We're currently at, I think it was 214 respondents when I last checked earlier this afternoon. And we also have river cards, where we're asking people just about their opinions or stories or how they connect their health and well-being to this area of the Mississippi River. The river comment cards we sent out before we did the survey, just to get some initial comments and feedbacks. We've had a really interesting, diverse mix of responses. People have focused on issues. We've had, for example, 5-year-olds draw ducks and fish, and then we've had people commenting about their own health concerns. People have focused on the river and their health and well-being. And we've also had differing opinions. For example, one key issue we're seeing a rise is people's opinions on industry. Some of our respondents have stated that industry is good, and we need to think smart and plan smart because it's a benefit and it provides jobs. And many other respondents have said that it's really impacting their health and well-being from either noise or air pollution, or just their everyday lifestyle, seeing the trucks, for example, going in and out, their kids are playing on the streets and they're worried about their safety. So I think the river comment cards have been really great in seeing some of the different opinions people have about this area and really showing us that there's no easy solutions, and we really want to take into consideration all types of opinions and thoughts about how people's health and well-being, their lifestyles, are impacted by the river. This is just from last week, so it's a little bit different, but we've had a few more responses. This was the surveys that we've sent out online and also done in person. Most of our respondents have currently been from the Northeast area, and you can see 43%. And then we've had 22% from North Minneapolis, and then from South Minneapolis, downtown, and other areas, which includes bordering suburbs, and several people who haven't commented on where they're from. Just to note, we're still in progress. We're hoping to get about 400 surveys in total, so I encourage you to all fill them out today. We are focusing our efforts on North and Northeast Minneapolis, but we're not limiting responses, so we won't take out a survey just because they're not a resident of this area. Because we think that this is an important regional destination, and we want to have users from a variety of areas. So we really try to include other opinions from people living outside this area who are still traveling or not traveling to this area for recreation or for work or for school or other regions. And again, I'm just going to plug, please do take our survey today. So I have some early results that I pulled off from the survey. We've been collecting responses about the river itself and people's opinions, and also about their health and their lifestyles. And this is a sample question. I would travel to the Mississippi riverfront more, pardon me, there's a word missing, if, and you can see people's responses. So for the overwhelming responses being, there was a safe trail from my neighborhood to the river. Other highly popular responses have been, there were nonstop trails along both sides, there was more to do, such as kayak and birdwatch, there was more residential housing nearby, I felt more safer and more secure, it was easier to cross major streets, I could rent a boat, there was a beach to swim, there was less heavy industry nearby, more restaurants and shops, better connected, and easier to access. We've also had questions directly asking about their health and well-being and how their neighborhood impacts their health. So we've been concerned, for example, about traffic and car congestion and loud noises from local industry, or air pollution, poor water quality, poor quality housing, or not having enough jobs or not enough places nearby to exercise. So we've been focusing questions on both the river itself and on just the general neighborhoods and tracking people's responses by the neighborhood they're living in. It's also been really interesting to compare people's responses to some of the community health profile we've done. So earlier this summer, we basically did an extensive literature review. We looked at surveys that had already been done in this area focusing on health. For example, we collected obesity rates, asthma rates, we looked at incidents of crime and violence, we looked at levels of physical activity, birth data such as low birth weights, and of course census data on the area. And here's an example of one of the maps that was created. It's the proportion of Minneapolis residents that are overweight or obese by zip code. And you can really tell that there's one region in particular at the top left that has a very striking difference from the surrounding zip codes around it. And we have been noticing correlations or similarities between certain areas which have very noticeable health effects, as well as the response we're getting. So people that are talking, for example, about not being able to get out of their houses, to have places nearby that are safe and pleasant to exercise and get out. Here's another example of a map that we created. We looked at the average life expectancy for the whole area, and then we compared it to in the more specific regions what the life expectancy was there, and if it was less. And we looked, for example, at if this was based upon crime issues or traffic accidents or cardiovascular disease or obesity-related diseases. And again, it's been really interesting to compare the survey responses and just responses from the community as with the maps themselves and the other data that we've pulled from this area. And I'm now going to turn it over to Kenya, who's going to tell you briefly about some of the next steps that we're taking in this project. Oh, sorry. Is it Susan?
It's fine. We'll work it out. So some of the next step, as you can see, is targeted outreach to specific cultural and demographic groups, such as Southeast Asians, African American, Latino youth, Somali, etc. Those groups tend to be not as engaged in this process, as you can kind of see now from the audience reflected here. So the goal is to get more people involved, develop predictions on health impacts of the plans and recommendations, and identify how the plans can maximize potential health benefits while reducing possible harm. And then I'll turn it over to Susan for the last line and close us out.
Okay, and again, to incorporate all these recommendations into the modified plan. So one more plug here for everyone to take the survey. And the next slide, it is online, so if you have information of particularly of certain groups that you say that may not be represented here, that you feel would like to participate, please let us know so that we can make sure that we either come, stop by, or email the survey.
Don't worry about it.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're having comments, but I have a comment. And the comment is, I think this is really outstanding work and really necessary to the overall plan. But my other piece to that is there's some really positive things that are happening in the community regarding the environment and the fact that we are now having a richer environment that is more diverse. We now have eagles flying through and a variety of other positive things. And so for me, it would be really helpful. What are those positive elements in addition to these that you've identified that are enriching people's experiences along the riverfront? Because I appreciate this piece of it, but I also think there's the other aspect which would be helpful for me as a decision maker to all of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I love it, and you can probably speak to more of what some of the positive things that have come out of this thus far. But I do want to say that although the idea is to get more diverse people in, your voices are important too. We appreciate you being here tonight, listening. Thanks. We'll turn it over to Hyla.
Thank you. As you can tell, these processes are running parallel, and we're meeting constantly with one another. What you hear from different people is being brought together in rooms and talked about, so we're not running on parallel tracks here. But we do have different pieces to cover. I'm here to talk about mainly the land use and development piece. I'm Hyla Mason, planner of the city. We've talked about, you've seen the maps around here, which a lot of you came earlier and looked at. You saw that we sort of broken the study area down into sort of chunks. And that's just to make it more manageable and to understand the function of these. It is also to mirror the original plan, which basically had some of these sub-areas. There's nothing magical about them, that's just a way to understand them, but hopefully it gives people a sense of where we are in the area and the ground in the area. Okay, this is another way to look at this. If you're standing here at the sort of northern end, looking towards downtown, you can see the distance. So that's sort of just one perspective. I-94 on your right, Marshall Street on your left. And this is sort of that railroad bridge, Lowry Avenue, giving you a sense of where things are on the map here. And this is the other direction. So now you're standing in downtown and looking up the river. Right to here. The new Lowry Avenue Bridge, right here. And here's the end bridge, and we're right here. That's us now. So just to sort of get you oriented of where we are. A lot of you obviously are familiar with this area, but it does have a lot in it. So we're talking about this plan, about the Falls Plan, which was adopted in 2000, and my job here is to talk about what we're keeping and what we're proposing to change. And nothing you hear today here is final, so we're looking for input, for sure. What are we keeping? The original vision and goals of the plan, the idea of a continuous riverfront park and trail system, the idea of enhanced and new development that supports that and builds off of that, and a connection to the surrounding neighborhoods, all of those are still in. All of that is pretty much consistent with the original. The environmental restoration piece of that, there's a lot of degradation, but as Councilmember Costa has talked about, there's a lot of improvements. There's a lot of potential for improvements that continue to be made throughout this process. And also the land use guidance for a number of these areas will not change that much, especially in this map is the areas in white. So the areas closest to downtown and most immediate to this area the guidance for those is not changing a lot. You probably always see the handout when you came in, at least I hope you did. It was a two-pager looking like this. And one side has your map, the other side has a list of all these different sub-areas. Number on the map matches the number on the back sub-area. Where this goes through in detail all 18 sub-areas and talks about what's the recommendation for each of those areas. So if there's a particular area you're interested in, you can consult that. But we thought going through all 18 areas would be just a little bit too much for everyone. We didn't want to overload everyone's brain. So we're going to focus really on the areas that are changing from the original plan. But really, if you have questions or comments about any of these areas, please do type up with them when we get to the Q&A time. So that's just to get a sense of how we're presenting this today. So just focusing on the change areas we're going to be talking about today. Again, not saying the other areas aren't important, but these are the areas where we're spending most of the effort in revisioning. The first is to the Upper East Bank area. You're looking way up there on the northern end. If you know that area, OATI, the old Honeywell campus, Bureau of Engraving, Technology Drive. Area north of Dowling, this is, of course, north of Dowling on the West Bank. It's a mix of industry and a whole lot of other little things that are mixed in there too. The Upper Harbour Terminal area, the terminal itself is just the riverfront portion of this. Right here, what's going to happen with that? We'll talk about that recommendation. And the West Central, we'll call it the West Central Riverfront. That's two different areas, where this is the area of Semstone, Aggregate Industries, Northern Metals. This is the area just north of us here, between Broadway Pizza and the Riverview Townhomes. So those are the four areas where we're spending most of the energy and effort. And again, it's not because the other areas aren't important, it's just the other areas did less in-depth analysis this time around. So just going to start going through them and talking about where we're starting to land with draft possible recommendations. Again, everything's qualified here, everything needs your input. The West Central Riverfront, just to ground you again of what we're talking about here, this is the original Above the Falls plan, which showed it basically as being a giant park. And what has happened, there is some development here that's happened since then. The Riverview Townhomes, Parkway headquarters is here, Broadway Pizza, some various industrial buildings in between there. What we've talked about this area is, this is an area that already is mixed use. It has a whole lot of everything in a small area. And the focus really in looking at this is saying we already have a mix there. What needs to be done is to make sure that our focus is on what's compatible. Buffering and transitions between adjacent uses and opportunities to sort of mitigate existing conflicts, because there are some existing conflicts, are sort of the primary functions here. We've talked about this area being potential for sort of commercial or office type uses. It could also possibly be residential, but that's still under discussion. This is a place where, again, different types of uses can find a home, but they really do need to be good neighbors to us there right now. This is a cross-section that doesn't tell you very much, but just sort of as a starting of what our design folks are thinking about in terms of how to draw this. We do have this situation, an edge condition right now, with residential, a rail line, and an active cement processing plant, and more rail lines. So this is not really a aspirational thing, but just something that kind of lays it out what's there now in case there's a chance to talk through those. Those are also in the boards back there of these cross sections to give a sense of what's there. Okay, the area north of that, just north of that, the west central riverfront area, this is north of the BN Bridge. And we're talking about aggregate industries, Semstone, and some other heavy industries. This is currently sort of an I3 area in our zoning map. Short term, these uses, our analysis keeps telling us, are not headed out of here very quickly. They are established, they've been investing, they're here for the time being. But for us, that creates a situation where we're saying, maybe this is an area that's going to transition long term, but we need to have a game plan in the meantime. We need to say, these uses aren't going anywhere anytime fast. We need to think about plans for greening, improvements, and connectivity, and working with them. Not just saying they're going to go away. We expect maybe someday they will. These are not necessarily the highest value uses. There could be a better future for this area in terms of value and jobs. Again, we think this is an area that could be office or industrial, or light industrial, shall we say, as opposed to industrial. But again, this is a place where we'll probably have basically a long and a shorter term vision, because we do need the need to manage that transition time and manage existing uses, and not just say they're going to go right away. The original plan did suggest that they were just going to be bought out in short order. There's not, the tools that were in place at that time have changed in terms of policy and resources. That's less, the transition is less likely to happen sooner. But again, it's good to be prepared. It's good to have the opportunity to respond to opportunities as they emerge, because we can't always predict them. This is, again, a cross-section thinking about a future for this area. Again, you can see this much better on the board over there, of potential for Riverfront Parkway and Parksland, and potential for build out of something more compatible, more of an urban, more of an attractive street edge. I'm going to keep on moving up north. This is the Upper Harbor Terminal area. We've talked about this site a lot, because especially the Upper Harbor Terminal site itself is a city-owned property, close to 50 acres. There are policymakers are at this point saying there's a high likelihood of it closing in the not too distant future, that exact time frame to be determined. So we're treating this plan as an opportunity to at least start thinking about what needs to happen there. This site, again, is just the riverfront portion of the site is the Upper Harbor Terminal. There's industrial behind it, to the north of it, and to the south of it. As such, the original vision for this, which was to start out, just jump in and say, let's make it residential, we could not find a developer, or really any of our analysts, who said that they thought that was going to have a chance to work as a residential neighborhood, at least not as a first phase of one. That said, so the vision in this plan that's coming to pass looks a lot more like sort of a light industrial type model. Maybe office, maybe office headquarters, but again, a job generating model for this site. This is more needed than a lot of the other areas, again, because it's a property that's closing. So if you have a lot of insights and thoughts about this area, this is a good place to put in plenty of comments, because our policymakers are actively considering now what to do in terms of what will happen after the closure. Obviously, park development will be a very key part of that as well. A portion of the Riverfront Park area will be converted to park and to Parkway to serve it. I think we have a cross-section here that suggests, again, what could happen at one point along there. Do we have another one? Oh, there's another part. That just shows a possible redevelopment scheme where there's room to fit development, parking, some access and loading behind there, and a full-scale parkway. There's more to this riverfront we didn't kind of put in there, but the idea of the different ways we can fit a cross-section where we're making attractive urban green frontage that provides amenity, and at points will broaden out into a larger park. More on that from Andrew. This is the area just north of the Upper Harbor Terminal area. This is sort of a companion piece to this. It is all industrial right now with a lot of little miscellaneous. I think there's a few houses up there, a few little businesses, a few interesting little churches and things. It's a kind of a hodgepodge right now in terms of the uses. This has been shown in our analysis to be more possibly consistent with the idea of a residential community long term. that is a qualified statement because there's still not the market strength and not the ability to just go out there and build something now. If someone wanted to do that right now, we could have conversations, but at present there's not the strength there. So a scenario for this will be another one of those two-phase things most likely. There's the near-term realities, that this is an industrial area and is functioning and fully leased out and doing pretty well. And then there's the longer-term plan. We will need to have an implementation steps, some very detailed steps in terms of how that can become a reality. You'd say, well, why?
Can you use your laser pointer, ma'am, to point out where the old Mississippi Flats residential area used to be here? There used to be a huge residential area on the river.
Talking about right up here?
I don't know, I'm asking you.
I think it's right up here because I think it got incorporated.
It's
Up
above
here?
here?
It's
Okay.
off the map. Yeah, this whole thing here is the North Mississippi Regional Park. You're just seeing the very tail end of it. I'm pretty sure that residential development got bought out, demolished, and turned into part of the regional park.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for pointing it out, yes.
For those of you who have the pocket map, that goes all the way up to the top there. You can take a copy up on the way out, but that this doesn't focus on that.
I would say we did not include the North Mississippi Regional Park because it is a separate regional park from the plan for this one, and because since it's not changing, we did not want to focus too much on that, since there's so much else to cover. We talked about, again, short-term, so light industrial, maybe long-term, if we can work out an implementation plan that gets us there, maybe perhaps to be residential. And the reason, the why behind that is this is adjacent to existing residential neighborhoods. It's closer in. It has more connectivity and feel the extension of that and is less isolated from them. Again, here's a cross-section that shows a much more extensive park view for this area, where we could have, where there might be a situation where the distance gets so narrow that there's not really room to have development and park between the rail and the river, and it becomes all park. So we have some cross sections for that as well. This is the last piece. I know it's a lot, but we have a lot to cover here. The Upper East Bank. This is an area where frankly the vision's changed. Not much about the land use is predicted to change. Again, there's a couple industrial, more like office users up here, and a lot of green space, public and private. This is the St. Anthony Parkway here, part of the Grand Rounds that goes across on Camden Bridge and sort of wraps around here. Much of the screen on that side of it was actually privately owned land that's just undeveloped. A well-landscaped private space adjoining a public park with these types of uses. There's not a whole lot of room for infill, but if there was, we would think it would be compatible. The original plan suggested this would be a low-density residential neighborhood. Because it is separate from every other residential area, wrong button. It's between a sewage plant, a power plant, and an industrial area. It seems to be a good place to keep it similar to what it is now. So this is what Councilmember Hoffman mentioned, the existing zoning. The existing zoning in this area was never changed to match the original plan. So we're looking at here talking about, this is the opportunity where we actually do the next step after this is to change the zoning. What we've talked about in terms of the preliminary recommendations, and we'll get more into this in future meetings, is saying that maybe the existing industrial districts, even if the future is development is industrial, isn't doing the job, making the case for what we need to do in terms of what we want to see here. I know when you did the dot exercise over here, if you still have dots on you, make sure to stick them on one of these boards before you leave. We are talking about ways to, they have not made the final decision, of course, there's just draft recommendations, ways to modify perhaps some of our industrial districts to make them less of a place where we're just putting things that don't work elsewhere, and more of a place that's encouraging good design and good projects and good neighbors. So that's just something to think about for the future. And one last thing before I hand it off to Andrew to talk about parks. This is another piece of the coming attractions. We've heard from the health impact folks the importance of connectivity, and also heard from Andrew about some of the things that have been adopted to date, successes to date. This is not part of the rubric of the Delta Falls plan. It is part of our bicycle planning framework, but it is very good news for this area. What you're looking at here is a map that's actually taken, this is a map that shows projects straight from our city's adopted bicycle master plan, which was done through public works, not planning. And it shows a network of what are the planned trails and existing trails. Also, on-street and off-street in northeast in this area. The red ones are ones that are either in place or they're funded and so are in development. The blue dotted ones are not there yet, but they are adopted city policy that our plan is to pursue funding for them at some point in the future. This is map, well, in our future more G-Ways versions, we'll show how this matches with the riverway streets, but I can tell you that without looking at this. Does show a commitment to make those connections along a lot of those corridors. We know that just putting the bike lane down is not enough, but it does provide an opportunity to open the opportunity to talk about how we get to there and prioritize those important connections. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Andrew to talk about parks and trails.
Thank you, Hyla. Thank you. Thanks. Hyla walked us through the draft recommendations for the land uses for land use guidance for private development. I'm going to walk us through the master plan update vision for public parks and parkways. So I'll start by just reminding us of the 2000 plan. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here because everybody raised their hand and said they were familiar with it. But keep in mind these key plan elements. We hope that you see these are consistently carried through to our recommended updates. I'll remind everybody also of River First, a great deal of overlap in terms of principles, the guidelines that River First forwarded, a great deal of overlap between River First and the above the Falls Master Plan from 2000. And you will see in the following slides that I'll show pieces of River First, elements such as some of the specific park recommendations. You'll see those lifted from the River First Plan and incorporated into our draft recommendations for the above the Falls Master Plan. So, a reminder of our process. I'm just going to do a brief couple-slide history lesson. This is before the 2000 plan. Not a whole lot of public access or parkland north of the river. After the 2000 plan, of course, the parkway was extended up to the Burlington Northern line. Also recently, the Sharer parcel was acquired right here. Significant also is that the regional park boundary for the Above the Falls Regional Park was established. And as someone pointed out, that's actually a separate regional park from the North Mississippi Regional Park, which is where the Mississippi Flats is. So these are the draft recommendations for parklands in the Above the Falls Master Plan. And this is a hybrid graphic in that I'm showing the existing master plan, the existing regional park boundary here in red, and existing parklands in light green. And then in dark green, you can see where we're recommending that the plan call for new public parkland. And so along the northeast side of the East Bank, largely unchanged from the 2000 plan. In fact, the areas are exactly the same. You'll see some character slides that show that suggest a different park character from the 2000 plan. On the north side or the West Bank, you see that in most areas, this plan suggests expanding the regional park. And that's in response to the draft land use recommendations, the health impact assessment, our outreach to various communities, and our interaction with staff from other agencies. Significant park expansion is recommended, especially at the Lowry, the Lowry connection, and I'll talk more about that. And then at the Upper Harbor Terminal, we tried to balance the sense of park and parkway with privately developed land, tax-generating, job-generating land. And as Hyla said, that, especially at the Upper Harbor Terminal, it's still very much in conversation. And so I really encourage everyone to give us your input here tonight, in cards, etc. So I'll keep going so we can get to the questions and answers. So this shows revised regional park boundary that would incorporate all of those public parklands as well as the parkways. So I'll add in the parkways. You can see that's this stripe here on Marshall and the existing parkway here, and then extended up to Lindale and North Mississippi Regional Park. And very important other sense of greenways, green streets, and dedicated greenways. For example, just as the Above the Falls 2000 plan suggested, our update says we should keep the vision for greenways that would reuse rail corridors when those are disused. We should look at existing infrastructure like the Burlington Northern Bridge as opportunities for better connections across the river, dedicated to bikes and heads. And I'll show you some character imagery there. So this is a composite with some labels, and I hope it captures what I have been talking about. I also ask that you refer to the handout. Does everybody have the one-page handout? Because this summarizes what's stated more in more detail on that on the front page. So I'm not going to read this top to bottom, because we've touched on this, and I want to get to the question and answers, but I will point out that I'll reiterate that quite a few of these are retained from the 2000 master plan. Some of these are new recommendations, and they're drawn from the River First plan, both of which are adopted by the Park Board. So none of these are new ideas per se, they're just being incorporated into draft recommendations for this updated plan. This is a typical Parkway section, as Hyla suggested. This is more in keeping, this suggests a Parkway extension north of the existing parkway that's more in keeping with our existing parkways around the lakes, or at West River Parkway near the university, much more so than the West River Road that you see between Plymouth and Broadway. So for the time being, we're putting this forward as a recommended parkway section. I think we need to do studies that would look at the types of traffic, the volumes of traffic that might happen with the development projecting. So currently the vision that we're recommending is a calm parkway, a parkway more in keeping with our traditional parkways. So what's the character that's recommended for some of these areas? I'll start with the Northside Wetlands Park. All of these images are from the River First vision. The location is here on the left. You can see it's just north of Lowry, just at the southern end of the Upper Harbour Terminal, and this calls for, of course, an extension of West River Parkway. A very large wetland complex is created where there's habitat, water quality is improved. It's a true riparian edge, or a true river edge, but there's also room for trail access, and these trails, since we have more room here, don't necessarily have to be right against the parkway or the roadway. Of course, we integrate stormwater management throughout, and ultimately, the parkway would connect with North Mississippi Regional Park. Also in the Upper Harbour Terminal area, an extension of the Northside Wetlands is to the south. I was talking about habitat and water quality. This is much more about gathering spaces and programming places for a performance, for example. And so this is just a slightly different vision in the same area. So we feel these two are compatible. There's a need for a major park destination, especially on the north side of the West Bank. And again, all of these are from the River First vision, which was adopted by the Park Board earlier this year. To the south of the Upper Harbour Terminal, just north of the Burlington Northern Bridge and at the end of 26th Avenue North, is envisioned public access to the water, public access to the views, access to an extended West River Parkway and trails. And so just as many neighborhood plans have called for this, the Above the Falls plan called for this in 2000, we think this is an important priority to retain. Access via 26, connecting Parkway Park to the river, but also putting a destination there, a reason to go. You can get in the water. There are views of downtown and across the river. And you can connect to the trails. Across the River First vision calls for Northeast Riverfront parks that respect the river bank topography. That's more of a bluff type topography. And they call for restored riverbank and habitat, balancing that with the need for public access, for expanded public access to the water. Currently, for example, at Marshall Terrace Park, it's pretty tough to get down to the water. We think there should be more frequent access to the water, and it should be easier. And embedded in all of these are restoration and stewardship. So a restored riverbank that incorporates habitat that's consistent through all of these. The Sharer site down by Plymouth, the Plymouth Bridge on the east bank, is a site that's owned by the Park Board. We feel this is an excellent opportunity for a very near-term implementation. In fact, the schematic design for this site continues from the River First vision currently. So we feel it's important to incorporate this vision for Sharer Park in the Above the Falls Master Plan, and of course this calls for major redevelopment of this site as a park, with public access to the beach, better access to the water for boaters, for swimmers when the water's clean enough, stormwater management, of course, the possibility of a recreated Halls Island, which was there up until the early 60s as a natural river island, which was filled and incorporated into the Sharer Village lumber site. Also, this isn't related to the park development, but you can see along the edges there's park-supported development. There are new buildings, and the Park Board vision for those is that they wouldn't be within the park per se, but they would be park-supported. It would be a place where you can rent a community, maybe get a bite to eat. There might be nonprofit offices there, places for meetings, etc. It wouldn't be Currently, the vision is that it would not be exclusive use, a use that doesn't encourage people to come to the park and enjoy the park. It wouldn't be a use that doesn't support the park as a good place to be. That's a brief summary of the parks guidelines. I want to turn it back to Hyla so she can talk about next steps. I think this is just a couple, 3 slides, and then we can go over the question and answers and have a discussion.
Thanks everyone for your patience for sitting here. I'll get you through this quickly so we can get to the Q&A. First of all, this are major parts of the implementation framework of what's being developed. We have the River First Priority projects, which you just heard about Andrew. We have some of the near-term development opportunities related to land use, especially our Harbour Terminal comes to mind. We have some organizational implementation framework question about who does what and how, and sort of the regulatory zoning modifications over the city side in terms of how we change our regulations and zoning to match our vision for this area. This is a sense of what we're looking for in the near term towards the steps towards that piece. Right now, of course, we're sitting here in October. Through November, we're working on the draft plan update. The stuff you've heard today is sort of the heart of the recommendations, but of course, there's a lot more to the plan than that. Much of this is remaining consistent with the past plan, but there's still the piece that we have to put together. The way this plan will function will be is effectively replacing the old plan in terms of the document people consult. So pieces from the old plan are being pulled and drawn into it. The draft plan will be completed by early December. We do not have a date yet, but we will very soon. If you're not on our mailing list, please make sure your information is here so we can let you know. Within the next week or so, we hope to have that date finalized. That'll be a chance to sort of look at that draft plan, look at the context, and to start a formal 45-day public review period. That's on the city side that the park board also has review, but that's sort of ramping our plan up for a formal public hearing and approval process in early 2013, starting in January, with the different entities involved, our planning commission, of course, the park board, and the city council. What we need to hear from you today, whatever you want to say, of course, but what we'd really like to hear is what you like or dislike about the proposed land use and park features you've heard today, and what are the most important priorities for implementation. Those are just 2 things to think about. And here's just for comparison, the map, the original Butler Falls map and the current version of the land use map that we're looking at now. At this point, I think this ends our presentation. It's time to turn it over and just start taking questions. You can direct them at anyone you've heard speak today.
I realized looking at this that I had a preconceived idea that the buildings that would be added along the river would look old, and at every juncture, a brand new, lot of glass, blue and green, modern structures kind of plumped in there. Our choices over there were very modern. I just wonder if you would take the pulse of the group to see what the community wants to see for the new buildings on the river. I think there's a big difference between old and new, very modern, but I don't know what the community's take is on it.
That's a good question. I don't think we posed the question in those terms, in terms of old versus new. The examples here are not meant to be a bias of anti-old, but just examples of the stuff that's being built today.
It looks very suburban to me, as opposed to urban.
I have a piggyback on it, which is looking at the buildings like this without the river, it just feels so disconnected. So similarly, they don't seem to be part of the river or related to it.
I don't dislike either style of building. It was just, I realized after seeing all these modern buildings that wasn't my vision of what the river would look like.
That's very good feedback. So we'll make sure to take that into account as we're thinking forward.
Can we just ask how many people like brand new modern looking buildings? Go ahead.
Okay. Modern versus more traditional styles. Modern first. Who, if you had to pick a building, would be modern? Okay, what about the other traditional style? All right, we got both. I think one thing I did not mention in this that's probably worth noting is that there's a recent historic survey that was done for both sides of the river that identified actually a number of older historic buildings, especially on the west side of the river, That'll be something that's going to be pulled out in the plan and referencing that as an interesting and important part of the character we haven't gotten to yet. I don't know who put your hand first. Go ahead.
I'll go. My name is Tim Baylor, and in most cities throughout the country, the metropolitan areas embrace the river for housing as well as parkland. And even in this city, along the central riverfront, there's a lot of high-density housing there. And that's one of the reasons, probably the primary reason, that many consider the central riverfront so successful. I see some pictures on the boards over there. I don't see housing reflected on this upper river plan, and I'm just wondering why. We have some demonstrations of successful housing that's been built along the riverfront, and the continuance of that seems to me would be beneficial to everybody involved, the city, the residents, and the community that wants to come and visit.
Thanks for your comment. I do want to point out that on this map, the areas that show up as red on here are areas that we were saying could potentially have housing as part of a larger mix.
It says mixed use, it doesn't say residential.
Mixed, that's me being a planner geek. Mixed use generally includes residential. But it doesn't mean it means it's a mix. It's a mix. It's residential. It's commercial. It's office. It's a compatible mix of urban uses. This is not saying.
How would that zoning be designated if it's mixed use? Is that a zoning designation that says mixed use?
All of our commercial districts are mixed use,
okay.
And all of our OR districts are mixed use, and our ILOD district is a mixed use. We have a lot of our zoning code already is pre-programmed to be mixed use. It's kind of one of our sort of default settings for the city. So there's opportunities. We have not gotten to the zoning recommendations at this point, but it's something we'll certainly be talking about soon. Okay. I think you were next.
I had a question for Andrew.
Sure, I have a microphone. Can people hear the questions okay? Or?
Yeah. My question for Andrew is this. Along Marshall, what is the name of that change? It says it's pedestrian and bike friendly, but what is it? Well, it's not a parkway. What are we calling that change along it? What's it called?
Thanks for the question. Well, I think that's points to one of the next steps or implementation challenges that we have in front of us. In the 2000 plan, Hennepin County was a participant, at least, in the plan. And I'm bringing up Hennepin County because Marshall, your question was about Marshall.
Right.
Is a county road. And so they own the right of way. It's their road to operate and to maintain and to rebuild. So the 2000 plan cast a vision for that as a more parkway-like or a boulevard street, better trees, better sidewalks to walk, better signage about how to get to the river, bike facilities, etc. The recommendation for this plan is really not any different from that. But we see a need to have continued conversation with the county about this because in between 2000 and today, the county has kind of dropped out of the above the falls conversation. And so I think that's maybe one of the reasons that not much has changed along Marshall, although it's been restriped and the 4 lanes have changed to 2, so there has been some reconfiguration. And that shows, I think, an openness on the county's part to have this conversation. But clearly they are not yet ready to pursue reconstruction of Marshall as a parkway-like street to this degree. So I guess one answer to your question is that this plan doesn't propose much that's different from this, but in terms of next steps or implementation, we see a real need to engage the county in that question. Yeah, please.
Over the last couple of years, Northeast has been exposed from developers to a couple of plans that had a lot of docks and wharves and luxury housing, and they suggested that people would come in their big boats and park them up and go to restaurants and live there. I don't see anything like that. And you kind of been taking the pulse of developers who's interested in doing what. We've had developers that said that's a development they'd be willing to do, but I don't see any of it. That seems to me it could be a huge economic driver.
Well, this is kind of, a little bit of this falls in sort of the structural difficulty of today's meeting. We talked about what changed, we didn't talk about what didn't change. Some of the vision for riverfront vitality and development still is in the plan and will be continued through the plan. Those areas will largely be areas you see on the east bank. I should get the little pointer guy. We've talked about the grain belt area being a possibility, the nose around Lowry being a possibility. There are other probably opportunities outside the study area on the east bank. We had less there was less direction on the West Bank from our side, from our analysis to support that, but that did not mean it couldn't be an opportunity in the future. The idea of that being an option is something we probably should call forward, but again, it's something we just didn't spend time talking about because it is something that's being brought forward at that point.
For Northeast, you need to have that arts district overlay, and you don't have that on these maps. And you can't monkey with that arts district.
We will make sure that it shows up in there.
This plan doesn't propose any change to that.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, I don't see it anywhere, and when you say you're gonna put in luxury housing, that doesn't fit the arts district plan.
Does it say luxury housing?
I had something to, also for, Alan, I'm up at Supreme Marine, I got the boating place up here. Part of that for the river here for adding the big boats might change drastically over the next couple of years because of this Asian carp deal. They might be shutting down our locks. So for anybody to even look at a marina up here, they gotta wait and see what's gonna happen.
This gentleman.
I just have a question mostly about the market impact. I hear a lot of talk about environment and things like that, but I don't hear anything about food and access to food. And I'm with the Northeast Farmers Market, and we're doing a lot of things with the city, with the EBT, and stuff like that, and trying to get access. I think that, we're looking to be included in this, and I think the health impact is a great area to be a part of.
I agree. We only had 10 minutes, so we showed you the briefest of brief. The HIA is much larger than what we showed you. We absolutely are looking at issues of food, for example, food access, community initiatives, for example, having gardens, and like local groups that are involved in that. So it wasn't, I apologize, it wasn't as clear today, but it absolutely access to food and to other forms of, and even in grocery stores, and having those types of community gardens and markets, as you're discussing, is very much one of our considerations.
I guess it's my turn. I'll bring up another sore subject again, in that when you talk about mixed use, I'm looking at having subsidized housing in with the housing that they're building, because we have an awful lot of baby boomers. I predate them, I'm older than they are. So we have just an awful lot of seniors that are going to be retiring, and their incomes are going to be going downhill, and they need a place to live. This is something that has not been addressed. It should have been addressed like 30 years ago, so that there would be housing available. Right now, we're about 80% short on affordable housing for seniors. So, and I brought this up before, this would be a good time to incorporate this in this development here, because I hate to have gated communities down on the river, because that's where it's going.
I can respond to that. That is a subject we've spent some time thinking about, and there's nothing in the plan right now, the draft plan, that talks about mandating a certain type of housing, but the topic of affordable housing obviously is an important one to the city. One thing, we've on one hand been balancing the need for it, which will continue to grow, as you mentioned, and is an important thing. The other is our general city policy of not concentrating in affordable housing. A lot of the housing in the side of town already is affordable, either by design or what we call naturally affordable. It's just not worth a lot of money, so it becomes affordable. That our policies generally discourage investing in new affordable housing in areas that already have a lot, because that tends to concentrate those areas and not spread them out and not diversify the areas. Not to say that nothing can be built in the side of town but luxury housing, but it's an important consideration, in our housing policy staff are very keyed into that. I'd be interested to hear other viewpoints on that as we move forward too.
Doesn't have affordable housing.
Well, there may be some opportunities on the northeast side. I just know that most of the new projects that have been built in recent years in the northeast have been subsidized, larger ones.
Since the focus is on land use, I think this is a really exciting opportunity for both the park board and the city to work together and really revitalize this area. But for the park board to be successful in getting the money it needs for its trails and to operate and maintain those parks and trails, it's going to have to demonstrate heavy regional use, and there'll be counts, and it has to attract people from outside the immediate area, which means from the other side of downtown and the suburbs. And
One of the ideas that was thrown out by the River First team and by others was the idea of putting in, for example, a museum, like there was talk of moving the Bell Museum off of campus at the U, or an educational institution, or things that would be lively, not just during the day like an typical office building, but nights and weekends, and that the more activity you had tends to make people feel safe and comfortable on those trails, and it also helps with those counts. And what kind of land use would qualify for if somebody was to bring in, I mean, there's talk of a new 4-year Minskew campus, there's talk of museums moving and expanding. You know, if those things wanted to come into this area, do they meet mixed use, or do they meet industrial or business park definitions?
You know, Representative Luther, thank you. Thank you for repeating that call for regional appeal and regional connections. I think it's really important for folks to hear that. I'm going to let Hyla address the broader question of land use, but then I'd like to return to your question and talk about the Sheriff Brothers site.
And say that educational institutions and institutional institutions are allowed in a number of our industrial type districts. That would be, and if we talked about a new district that would relate to our business park recommendations, I imagine they would too. You're talking about something in the park that relates again to what Andrew's saying, but the vision is not meant to be one that shuts down good opportunities and good options. It's meant to be realistic and say this is what we are working with, and this is how we move forward to a better place from here. So we're going to make sure that there's enough flexibility that when something comes up and says, hey, I want to build a new museum, we have an opening to talk about that. But we can't, if it's not coming, we can't assume it either.
I'll just add to that by returning to the Sheriff's site. For park supportive uses surrounding the Sheriff's site on the park board owned property, and you saw that slide, it's very much on our minds at the park board that needs to be 4 seasons, it needs to be night and day, it needs to be a draw regionally as well as a draw for the neighborhoods from both sides of the river. So that's a lot of stuff in a small bag, but we want to make sure that it's not dark at 5 on Tuesday, for example, that it is lively, and that it's not just a local draw, but it's both a local draw and a potentially regional draw at beach, for example. We have talked about potential arts uses within some of those buildings, not on the scale of a campus, but on a small scale that would fit those buildings. So you heard Hyla's answer across the plan. On a small scale, it's very much a concern at the Sheriff's site that we bring in a variety of uses to appeal to locals and the
I'd like to piggyback on Mr. Baylor's comments that the Hawthorne Neighborhood Council has taken a pretty strong stance in solidarity with the residents at the Riverview Townhomes that we want to see more housing on the riverfront, specifically in Area 4 and, if possible, Area 5, although I understand some of the logistical difficulties with that in the near future. And with that in mind, I just have to say that I've got some issues with the dots here and this exercise right now, because those are pictures of building styles and building types, and we're really talking about land use. And so when we use these dots here, I worry that what's going to come out of this is people will use the votes here, which in some ways are predetermined because housing and residential and commercial are not equal choices throughout some of these areas where a lot of folks in the community want to see these types of choices. So I don't want this to predetermine us to say, now that we voted on this, the community said this, because the community didn't have the full choices as part of this exercise here. I want to see more of an opportunity to use, to get residential and housing in, especially in Area 4 and 5 when we can get it.
I want to make clear, I did not mean in any way to suggest that this was a deterministic exercise, that this vote would be anything that would say you signed off on anything. This is very purposely separated from land use. It's not saying this is a particular site in mind. We are going to have some increasingly good content from our consultants who have been sort of working behind the scenes in terms of envisioning what these areas can look like. This was just a start of an exercise to get people thinking about the types of development. And again, it brings people reaction because it's saying, I do or don't like that, this could or couldn't be here, and those are obviously going to come out of it. But I want to assure everyone this exercise is just to get people thinking about design types is not to, in any way, to say we're assigning them to any particular area right now. I don't remember who is. Who's next?
Right here. You. Okay, one thing that, when you're talking about Marshall being a county road, I don't know how many people drive throughout the county. As I end up throughout the entire area, live in Hawthorne, but end up all over because of my job. And all of the county roads right now look absolutely identical. I can drive from here out to Brooklyn Center, any direction, northeast, south, or west, and without ever seeing a sign, I can tell you whether I'm on a county road or not. We need to stand up for Marshall at least, not turn it into a boulevard down the street, an arrow, and no bike lanes, and no parking to speak of. Look at what they did to Broadway. That wasn't what the community wanted. The county decided that's what they were doing, and we had to fight for kids to cross in safe spaces to get back and forth to school, and this is high schoolers and back and forth to the park. They jammed it down our throat. We didn't get a choice on that. So it's time now to stand up for Marshall, people that are over there and have the time to attend these meetings, because Broadway wasn't what the community wanted.
I want to thank you for sharing that, and I'm just, this isn't fair, but I'm wondering how many people agree with that. And maybe y'all raising your hands, but that's, what you just said is a big reason that this is in the plan update, that we retain that character. I think the problem, as I said, is that the county has kind of dropped out of the conversation for better or worse. So the vision is still there. It's the implementation challenge that we have to get our arms around.
Right. Every single county road looks absolutely identical right now. Right here.
I'm going to change the subject a little bit. I'm working with a group of Dakota people within the entire Dakota Nation. We have an MOA with St. Paul in identifying our spiritual and sacred sites. We're soon to be offering one to the Minneapolis Park Board and doing the same thing, because just recently I found out that we have a water spirit that lives underneath the falls. And we have Spirit Island, we have some mud flats there that are medicinal, and we'd like to be able to have these identified, protected, and preserved. Because basically right now, I'm from a population, it's illegal for me to be in Minnesota, because the Dakota Removal Act is still on the books. However, there's no federal officials around to enforce it, and I was born here and I've been raised here. I'm really hoping that, well, I know I talked with John. John wants to work with us, and I'm hoping that this is all incorporated in part of this. So, and I'm like the only urban person. I have a former chair from Redwood Falls, and he has contacts with the entire Dakota Nation, the elders and the spiritual leaders, who give us input into their specific languages, or a specific language that goes with each of the sites that we have. And we have to identify them accordingly. So we've done that with St. Paul, because we have the end site over there, which is what you call Carver's Cave. Here we have, at Fort Snelling, we have the Camp Coldwater, which is our creation site. And even though it's all by word, or by verbal or oral tradition, our tradition is verbatim. What we say is passed on, and that's how you keep the stories alive and truthful. Other populations embellish a little bit, and they kind of did that in with us at Camp Coldwater by using it against us. But I'm hoping that we can get all of this identified here along the river, where you people are looking to do things and have consideration for our sites.
I just want to take a minute to respond to that. Thank you very much for sharing that. Malcolm, I remember your name correctly. Thank you for coming, Malcolm. I want to talk briefly about Above the Falls, but I want to then give a plug to some future planning work. I think at Above the Falls, what you see here is a land use guidance plan, and especially, I'll speak to the park side. In the parks, as we build these new parks, there's a lot of design work to be done, and that design work is not represented in this plan. This is not to design the parks. That comes later, and part of that design, a significant part of that design work will be reaching out, engaging with the broader communities, people that use the parks, that live next to the parks, that come from all over to visit our city, and maybe people who haven't participated in the past, who don't necessarily feel that they have a place at the table, like some of the folks you were talking about. To me, that applies not just to Above the Falls, and this is my plug, it applies to the Central Riverfront master planning effort that will kick off in early 2013. For me, it's been a really important point to try and make some contacts in the communities that you mentioned, Malcolm. And so I'll give you my business card again, I think if you need one. And I really want to stay in touch with you and some of the other folks from the Dakota communities that I've talked to, so we can engage you folks in the Central Riverfront Master Plan, so we can let people know about Oahe and the other cultural significances around that place. I'm very glad you made us here.
I have a couple comments, and then I see two people. One is I want to make sure we're in the habit of maybe I'd like to see some accurate data from the city around the affordable housing stock that exists in North Minneapolis. I don't think it's up to date at all, so I don't want that to be the reason why something can and should exist, should not exist. When I know that there's 3 housing projects that the city just approved less than 60 days that are affordable housing projects in North Minneapolis. So if there's opportunity, I want to make sure that we have that opportunity to create that access for folks along the river so that it's not just high end. We pay taxes here too, so we need to make sure that there's equity for folks who maybe just low-income working families, if you will, and some subsidized housing for seniors as well. The second piece is, so that would be really good information for the city to get and provide people with that. I think, okay, and I think the second thing is one is just, as we talked about before, I know we'll do, is making sure that folks can see the feedback that they've already given to inform what this plan looks like, and then do know that there will be more opportunities to weigh in on it more intentionally via the sections, so that our vision can start being built around this. That at least that's our goal. Just knowing that. But the last thing is that I think what's really important here for me tonight is that not only are our voices heard and responded to, but that we also remember that this is about creating one river and that there's equity on both sides. This is not about one side being more equitable than the other. This is about one river, one city, equity for both. And so when I think about development in Northeast, I live in North Minneapolis. I think about development for North Minneapolis too. This is about how both of our communities, which is one city, can benefit from this development. If we're talking about regional, then North Minneapolis is a part of that region. So I just want to make sure that as residents of the city and officials who represent all of us in some facet, that we're remembering that this is about one river, and that's it.
I'm Phyllis Kahn, and with great consistency, I make the same complaint about every one of these, I'm Phyllis Kahn, and with great consistency, I make the same complaint about at every one of these meetings. The first thing is that blue thing going down here might as well be a prairie or a piece of land or something. There is no use of the river, no use of water uses in the area. I admit the Halls Park one is. But for example, these are some of the things I would like to see. I would like to see marinas so people can rent boats or keep their own boat, keep their own boat at appropriate times there. I'd like to see houseboats. We've chased existing houseboats away from further south, and we've made life difficult for the few they are. They are highly positive. I mean, I've ridden down that trail that goes around the Target Center behind some people riding bikes, and you say, wow, look at those boats there. That's terrific. I mean, and rivers, I understand several other things. New York City recently, and went to a concert called Barge Music. It was on a barge in the East River, and you got to it by a ferry boat. Looked at the paper yesterday, Cornell University is building a technology center on an island in the East River. I mean, I don't think we have enough space to do things like that. One of the other things we talked about, no subsidized. The city of Montreal had a plan, I think, quite a while ago, which they did, which had you'd go down a block and there would be, you know, luxury or high-priced or market rate housing, and then, you know, a couple of houses, and then right next to it, not big blocks, there'd be a chunk of affordable housing. Of course, with the level of gentrification, all the stuff that was built as affordable housing is now rapidly creeping what was originally the market rate housing. But what I think a river plan ought to be is about, this Hudson, someone just told me the Hudson River is putting in a pool. I've often talked about the barge on the River Seine in Paris, which uses river water and filters it for a swimming barge that's there. But someone just told me there's a construction going in on the Hudson River without a barge, which is just building some, you know, it's something that then puts a filtered water swimming area in it. And frankly, I think bodies of water are for people to use in the water and around the water, and there's very little of that in either of these plans. And that's why I couldn't put dots on anything over there, because you didn't see any river in any of them.
I know Diane had something to say.
Yeah, we have a few minutes left. I'm curious how many other hands we have.
I just want to say something. I see a lot of people here from the Riverview Town Home Association, and I am one of them. I'm also a catalyst for making that happen. I also was a member of the Planning Commission during the 2000 Above the Falls plan. And we have some very specific concerns and interests, because what we've done there is bring people from outside of the community, professional people with disposable income, with varied interests, with special skill sets into North Minneapolis. And we like it there. And we don't see why it can't be expanded. And as I look at Area 4, which is mixed use, which you say can include commercial, industrial, as well as housing, I'm not sure, I don't see why Section 5 can't be also designated as mixed use, since this is planned. And I guess I'm asking more specifically, can we convert that to mixed use, Area 5?
This is a draft. If anyone has opinions about any of these things and they're different than that, speak up and have your voice heard. There's reason for doing this. It's not just to report out. The reason the staff has recommended 5 is because we don't have an implementation path to get there. I don't want to make it sound like I'm just saying it's too hard. What I mean is that if we get too far ahead of ourselves with implementation and we don't have the path to get there, what we end up with is creating a situation where we just freeze things in time, freeze things in place, and things can't move forward. The more support we have for development on the Upper Riverfront, the more interest and more comments, the more we show the case that this is a place we should be investing resources, a place like that. We need significant public dollars up front to make a change happen. The more we can make a case that that is the desired vision, the more it is. But again, the reason we're showing this is this is what we know we can get to. This is what we think could be a viable and meaningful vision for the area, even though it's different. So again, lots of room for comment and thoughts.
So Diane, and then there was a couple of questions over there.
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to Joan Vaughn's question regarding Marshall Street. And just to let you know that I've initiated with Hennepin County a discussion about Marshall Street with our Bike Advisory Committee, and so we are moving ahead with that in the idea of expanding the vision so that it is more pedestrian and especially bike friendly along that roadway. And of course we'll have a new county commissioner, so I think we'll have someone also to look forward to hopefully partner as we move that initiative. And the plan is to really look at Marshall Avenue, not only Marshall Avenue Northeast, but all the way to 694. So we really have a fully robust plan that integrates our community with others. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I don't remember exactly who.
We talk about industrial properties going away on the West Bank, particularly, and we understand that this could be a long-term process. At the same time, we have the Upper Harbor Terminal, which is our property, and perhaps a near-term opportunity to completely change the use of that 50 acres. Why would we want to bring industry into that area and add industry onto the river when we want to reduce the industry?
There's a number of different angles for that question, but just to talk about sort of where the thought process of getting us there. When we talk about reducing industry, what a lot of folks, what I hear most people talking about is reducing the impacts of it, saying that this is something that's noisy, stinky, loud, dusty, a bad neighbor, not an asset to the community, doesn't employ a lot of folks. Those aspects of things we want to tackle. But when we talk about there's some good in having an industry and office space, is we're talking about areas that really need really good jobs. And those type of jobs are jobs that you don't need an advanced degree. You just need the willingness to work and some training. This is the type of jobs that our city needs. We also need tax base, which is part of that as well. And this is the type of, it almost comes down to a philosophical debate of saying which type is a better thing for the city, but really looking at the context of our city, what is our future, what is this area really set up to be the strongest at and the best at. We have heard that job generating uses are really part of that. And we know people are going to disagree, and this is definitely the time to have that conversation and push back and say, no, I see a different vision. But those are the reasons we're sort of thinking in terms of that, for that area.
Yeah, that was not the vision of the original developers of the park system in Minneapolis, of Theodore Wirth. They stuck their necks out and they acquired land around the lakes and around Minnehaha Creek because they knew that this would be a very big benefit for the city. And the presidential candidates talk about jobs. Candidates always talk about jobs, but we need to stick up for the parks and the land because that's what makes the city desirable and livable and healthy.
And I have to jump in here. I was going to introduce myself later. I'm Mary Janet McGuire, and I'm one of the chairs of Global Falls, and we're co-hosting this. I apologize I was late. I had a family situation. But this has been a discussion since the beginning, and what keeps coming back is it's not park and trails or jobs. And that sets the community up, because of course we need jobs. And in this area of the city, we especially need jobs. But we can have river-related jobs like Phyllis was talking about, and have green space and trails, and we deserve it just like the rest of the city. And it isn't, oh, we have to have a factory because we have to have jobs. And I would disagree that I hear people saying, this is not the place for some of these developments, some of these jobs. This is a river, and it should celebrate the river, enhance the river, interact with the river, and do jobs. So it's not either or, it's both and.
Question, right? Oh, Joe's back here.
And your point, I want to go on. First, I wanted to explain Lowry is a county road, and they did put bypass on that, so it's not that they never do. However, to Ian's point about the west side, we also exist here, not just the east side. This goes back to '98, a fight with the city and Parkway County on this, because when I was my first term in the legislature, we were asked to come to a meeting, and it was going to be explained, and that was their first plans for the upper river. And after almost 2 hours of hearing about the east side, I asked, what about the west side? And they said, well, our plans are just to leave that industrial. It's been a total fight with the city ever since then. I'm looking at this plan, the River First plan that came out from the Park Board study group, had the entire Port of Minneapolis as parkland with an amphitheater on that, and that huge cold storage building was going to be a youth recreation center, which is something that is extremely needed up in this area of North Minneapolis. There's nothing like it anywhere near there. Obviously, mixed use is that. You said that people are okay with industry when it's light. No, they're not. They do not want industry, and I don't know why you keep coming back with that. The mayor stood up when this first plan from the Park Board came out with River First and said, no, we'll have industry in there. That is not what the people want, and the city keeps saying they do. I go all over and ask people. They don't flood these meetings. They have other things to do, but they want parkland and some housing and amenity type of businesses that go with that, not industry. So I really get tired of the city trying to say everybody wants industry. They don't. Also the jobs, you know, get real. I've looked into it. 7% of all the jobs down in that area are living on the north side. So the city stopped when I had the brownfields legislation for Minnesota. I wanted to put in there that if people got money from the state to redo a brownfields, like along Washington Avenue there, that they had to hire a certain number from the surrounding, say, 2 miles or whatever if they qualified. Even the State Department, the State Chamber of Commerce, the League of Cities did not oppose it. The city of Minneapolis opposed it. So quit trying to justify industry in here with the argument that we're going to get flooded with jobs on the north side, because you know and I know that that's not true.
There's just 2 more questions, and I want to respect the time because we're a few minutes over. Did you want to respond, Halo?
Duly noted.
Okay. Oh, right here. Go right here.
I agree with the gentleman in this quote. You're talking about jobs on the north side, but there are no jobs on the north side. I mean, if you take a survey, probably none. I'm talking about the guys that actually work in this area four, since 5.
I mean, you're talking about people who live in the north side and work there.
Work there.
7%. I'd like to respond to both those comments. One, I don't want any impression that I feel like I'm speaking for everyone when I'm talking about that. I was just talking about the thought process to get what's up here on the board. We know community's different. We know that's important. And one thing that will come in our plan is that sort of statement of saying if there are going to be jobs, then there needs to be a connection, a job linkage to the community. That's the whole point, is raising this area up, not providing jobs for someone who lives 50 miles away. So that's saying there's the if then there's, we haven't talked about, but that would definitely be part of our plan.
Okay, I live in zone 4, number 4, and I live at 24/7. Okay, most of the people that work in the area around here, they're like 8, 9 to 5, or whatever, they leave in the community. I mean, they leave, and they don't come back until Monday morning. But I'm here Monday through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so, how can it impact my life? And that's the way it seems to me. I mean, like, I have no say so whatsoever what goes on in the community.
Good point.
Yeah, I think that's
why you're here.
The purpose of this meeting. We're glad to hear the discussion.
Guys, one here. I feel like I'm missing somebody over here. 2 more questions, I think, Georgiana. Okay, sorry.
I'd like to piggyback on what Joel said and what Rudy just said. And maybe I'm not seeing this right, but on the north side, on the west side, Andrew talked about after 5, the area being dark after 5. What happened to the entertainment district that was in the original Republic Falls plan? I'm having trouble with exactly what Rudy's talking about. If we have all, industry or even other kinds of businesses, everything shuts down at 5. So if I'm going to be riding my bike, particularly as a woman alone, I'm not going to be going up that way. I'm going to be going the same way I always go, on the trails where there are residential housing, where there's places to go, where there's a destination. And I would hope that we could get some destination businesses for the north side. If I'm taking the Cedar Lake Trail, everybody takes the Cedar Lake Trail, they turn right, you can go down by the Guthrie, you can go to the Mill City Museum, you can go to the co-op there, you go across the Stone Arch Bridge, get a hamburger on Procknot. I'd really like to see that on the north side. And I'd like to see more housing, because the more residential housing you have, the larger tax base. And so that's just my little editorial. But
I would say that as for those that
stop, I mean, is that part of this? Is that what I'm trying to ask?
You're asking about the
Talking
sort
about
of mixed-use
5?
entertainment district?
Yeah.
Is that right, Susan? That's here?
It
In
used
the
to be
2000
there.
plan. No, I'm pointing it out where it is in the 2000 plan. It's here in the draft recommendations that we're discussing today. So, to answer your question directly, I don't want to
That's industrial.
speak for you.
It says
You said that's
industrial.
industrial.
This, I'm saying it's the same area. This is not in this recommendation.
Right.
That's the problem.
Clear, you asked the question.
Yeah, I know that. He's kidding. That he went away.
we don't, part of it is not in any way saying that would not be an absolutely wonderful thing. The reason it's not in there is because there's not a path to get us there.
But if we don't start zoning it that way or putting it there, it never becomes. Or negotiating.
Excuse me. My apologies for coming late. I'm Dorothy Bridges. I live over in Riverview Townhome. I echo what Joe has said. What others have said in the room. I'm going to take it a step further. Why aren't we zoning it purely residential in 4 and 5? Why do we have to have mixed use? Because mixed use, you can't control what goes in. Before we know it, it's done. There's very little oversight to keep these industries honest. And I totally agree with Joe. The light industry is not what the people in this community want. When you ask the right question, you get a number of different answers. But if you ask the right question in the right way, then the results will come back differently. What people want here, and I've lived in this community for 30-something years. I started in North Minneapolis, I moved away, and I came back because I wanted to make a difference where my family and I started. We invested a great deal of our own resources. You mentioned taxes, that businesses pay taxes. Yes, they do, but we do too. And in my opinion, I think there's much more of a permanency when you have residents that are thriving, that are putting their money back into the community where they live. And that's healthy, sustainable communities, not having to really bargain for fights with light industry. That's when a community is healthy and sustainable. And I can't figure out why the city doesn't want more of that. Why can't we zone this residential instead of mixed use? Because what my biggest concern is once it's in there, what can the city do to control what they do or what goes in?
Again, the zoning has not been something we've determined what this could be. Mixed use is a very general category and covers like half of the zoning districts in our code. This is not a call on that. What I can simply respond on the question of residential is everyone loves good, strong residential neighborhoods. The city, of course, loves them. They actually pay more per square foot in taxes than industrial. We know that. There's nothing in here that says there's anything against residential. It's mainly saying, what is the area like now? And if we do change it to residential zoning, there is a risk, and we need to mitigate that risk. The risk is that it becomes a non-conforming industrial area, and nothing changes at all. We cannot just rezone it. It has to have a plan to get us to the next step. It has to be part of a larger strategy. We're working on that strategy. We need help assisting that strategy because it's a case to be made that resources need to be invested here as a priority. Simply zoning it will do probably almost nothing in the short term, except for a few isolated sites.
Simply zoning it will create the market demand, and the market developers will come in if the residential zoning density is high enough. You won't have to do a thing but rezone it properly. I know, I did it before.
Yeah, you are.
Okay. I'm Alan Tucker. I own the Supreme Marine. I'm up on Washington here. Reason I moved up there is because we work on outboard motors. I'm afraid when you run them outside of the water, they're really loud. I used to be in northeast Minneapolis. I had to work with the residents over there because we had I'm afraid when we run the engine, sometimes they're a little loud and we work on it. That's the reason I moved up there, because the highway is so noisy that it doesn't matter if we make a lot of noise. You know, and I don't mind the residential move here. I've been on AVTAC since 2000, and I'm afraid we fought with the River First over here because that wasn't in the original plan. We really didn't want residential. We actually fought quite hard.
Sure did.
But now it is there, so now I guess we got to deal with it. But you know, somewhere up in 8 where I am, it's for most industrial and stuff like that, it's perfect for them. They're right off the highway. They get in and out in a hurry. They don't bother anybody. There isn't much land. We need the parkland along the river there, and I agree with that. But there has to be a place that there isn't much around the city that you can get on and off the highway and work and not bother all the residential areas that we do have. So I guess that's my point.
This is, and I know the staff was just assigned to look at this particular area, but I think we as citizens have the right to say you need to look at the bigger picture. And to me, if you drive through any of our industrial areas in Northeast, I can't speak for North, Joe could, there are for sale and for lease signs everywhere, in every industrial zoned area along East Hennepin, in Mid-City, and those are areas that will not get redeveloped, who are currently appropriately zoned away from residential, because when this opens up and the city starts marketing, because you know, the corporate officers would love to have a river view. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to share it with their workers. When I was in college, worked in this building, and in this corner here, there was a window that was about 2.5 feet wide, and then it went for about 60 feet, and we were in a sweatshop putting together the MLS catalogs for the rest of the nation. And they didn't want us distracted by that beautiful river view. And, you know, it was really, I mean, and, you know, a river is something, we are one of the greatest rivers in the world. We're in the top 5 or 7, depending on how you rate them. And to give the view of that river to anybody that isn't going to do something absolutely extraordinary, extra special, to celebrate and welcome that and use it is just unconscionable. We need to have, for all of our industrial areas, they all should be back where they can't see the river. All the river views should go to people who are going to be using them and enjoying them 7 days a week, as far as I'm concerned. And if that's an office that's working 7 days a week, I'm willing to entertain that. But we can't afford to have warehouses that are run by robots. We can't afford to have industries that primarily support people who live in the suburbs who will race down Marshall or down 94 to get to the job and leave just as quick and will never invest in our community and its future. And so if there's a way that we have to land bank this by zoning and things don't happen for a while, I'm a patient person, and I think our community is too. I think we need to fill in the other areas first that right now are on the market before we go, and we need to set standards of how many jobs per square foot, how many, we have to say all the parking has to be underground. It can't be seas of on-street parking. I mean, a car sitting there 8 hours a day isn't enjoying the view. And so, you know, we need to kind of figure out how to treat this so much differently than any other area that you've ever planned for. And I mean, I think that's the point that Phyllis was making. And I don't see that. I see you using the existing tools and not creating new tools that would really say, you can't be here unless you meet these kind of standards. And, you know, I mean, Coloplast is the example. It didn't work in terms of providing jobs for North or Northeast. My understanding is it's a mostly empty building. You know, it's got a campus that when the Caribbean Fest was going on, no one felt like they could walk on their grass. You know, and so we need to think about that. How do you create a synergy between whatever businesses are located there so that everybody feels welcome and it's a synergistic relationship. So I really think we need some really strong criteria that maybe aren't part of your normal tools, but I think if you're going to have a view on the river, it has to be that the building, the landscaping, and the use is complementary. And I want to go up and down those trails 7 days a week, and on Saturday and Sunday, and I want eyes on me when I'm on the river. And residential will provide that. A 24/7 operation, like a surgical care center would do that. That's operating, an urgent care center would probably do that. I mean, there are businesses that would potentially meet those standards, but they're more selective than I think the tools you've got right in front of you right now.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. The only thing that I would add is just saying, and I'm sorry I don't know the numbers for Northeast, but I think it helps to consider the loss of density that North Minneapolis has had over the last 10 years of losing 7,700 residents, and how the city of Minneapolis seems to be very focused, which I support, on creating or strengthening the tax base here. And part of doing that will be through residential, housing development. And I'm wondering what our, maybe in the future, some of the comparative analysis is between the industrial community versus the residential, and how much each pays into the tax base. From what I understand, this newer community here, these townhomes back here, approximately pay more than $500,000 into the tax base, whereas though this industrial community pays probably less than $40,000 annually. So I mean, or just over time. So I think that will be a very important consideration when we talk about this drive of building and strengthening our tax base. Like what sort of development, how we're thinking about that. Because right now in our community we need density. We need more people there. We lost a lot of residents, and so how do we get that back? And this is just an opportunity to help create that density that's needed for the transit projects that we're all facing, with the streetcars along West Broadway that will go to Northeast and Central. There's a lot of opportunities to help support the density that we can create. And that's my last input, and whatever you want to say to wrap it up. Thank you all, though, for your presentations.
I want to say thank you for all you true believers who stuck it out for the last piece here. Thanks again. This is a start of our conversation. I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer. I'm going to hang out with the chair. Yeah.
I just want to invite people to be involved in AFCAC. We meet the last Tuesday of the month. And as a number of people have mentioned, a lot of us have been on the committee for 15 years, since the early meetings before the Above the Falls plan was approved, and now through these transitions. So this is going to take some digging down, some looking at this foot and that mile and this area, and what are the possibilities and what is the data, and working with the city and the park board to get all this done. So one meeting's not going to do it. There's another meeting in December, but neighborhoods are weighing in, individual groups are weighing in, environmental groups, and we really invite you to join us if you don't have another group, or join all the groups, because this is not an easy situation. We all have to worry about tax base and jobs and environment. So please join us last Tuesday of the month. We meet right over here at 7 o'clock. If you have any questions, we're all here. And
Absolutely word. We heard a lot of comments today. We were recording them. I strongly encourage you to submit comments in writing also. You can use these comment cards on the Park Board's website. Please leave us your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And join us in December. There'll be another meeting. We'll let you know.